So as the youngest in my family, early on, I started to look for ways to keep up with my older siblings. I worked hard to anticipate their bumps, turns, so that I could keep up and not fall behind. Some might call me a little bit of a control freak. I like to think of myself as a strategic optimizer. So it's not surprising that I don't like unexpected twists and turns in life, and that I'm really not a big fan of roller coasters. 4 years ago, in pursuit of a dream, I found myself buying perhaps one of the most expensive tickets to the world's largest, most hormonal, emotional roller coaster. Perhaps you may relate to my story, or perhaps you know someone who's been on a journey like this. And today, I will share with you a story of pursuing a dream with reckless abandon, hoping to give voice to the years that I spent living in silent desperation on this emotional roller coaster, and to talk about the accelerated learning that happens in the free fall when what you covet most is beyond terror's edge. As a young person, I lived in fear of getting pregnant. My mother would constantly remind me to get my MRS degree before I got my MOM degree. So much so that when I finally got my MRS degree, I really coveted that MOM degree. And in 7th grade health class, they teach you that if you come within 4 feet of sperm, you'll get pregnant. What they don't talk about is infertility and the challenges associated with getting pregnant. I built a career and a life being really intentional. In fact, I wrote a book that has purposeful productivity in the title. So when I decided to do something, it was pretty much as good as done. That's why the infertility journey kicked my tail and nearly broke me. You can't do your way into being pregnant. And ironically, while I'm not alone on this journey, 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage, and an estimated 20% of couples have challenges conceiving. It's an incredibly isolating, lonely journey. So shortly after our wedding, I went to the doctor's office, eager to get started on that MOM degree. And my gynecologist asked me point blank, she said, "Why did you wait so long? You know, 39, you're really old." Filed that under not helpful. But quickly, we were deeply immersed into the fertility world. And suddenly I became part of a club, a secret club that no one wants to be a part of, but once you're a part of it, there's an incredible, profound bonding. We had a somewhat accelerated pace into IVF, or in vitro fertilization. And early on, it was amazing how many people knew nothing about the process and really were curious. What is it? How does it work? And why are there so many twins floating around nowadays? So quick 101. What they do is they exponentially increase your hormones. So rather than giving off 1 or 2 eggs a month, if you're lucky, you give off 20 or 30 eggs. So think for a moment to the worst PMS you've ever experienced, personally or with your woman or a sister or so forth. Now exponentially increase that 10, 12-fold. Your privates are no longer privates. Your sanity, your ability to think straight flies out the window, and you cling to your health while these hormones, 10 times the natural level, rage through your body. So what does that mean? Your ovaries, normally the size of a walnut, can grow to be the size of a cantaloupe, and you have 2 of them, most of us. For me personally, I gained 8% of my body weight in 5 days. So all of a sudden I had a couple problems. I looked awful, I felt awful, and how do you pack for a business trip when you're not really sure what size you're gonna be in a couple days? IVF is not for the faint of heart, and yet I coveted motherhood at such a cellular level. Each failed cycle, there was a mounting intensity. And yet the more aggressively I pursued it, the further out of reach it was. Now, as John mentioned a little bit about my background, there's an ironic twist here. Because professionally, I used to think about life as a donut. I used to speak about life as a donut. Inside the donut hole is your comfort zone. That's where life is safe, easy, familiar, potentially a little bit boring. Life in the donut is your learning zone, where you're growing, you're stretching, you feel alive, you feel awake, you feel vibrant. Get too close to that outer edge of terror's edge, you can hit paralysis analysis. Too much time too close to that outer edge, you would hit burnout. I taught leaders around the globe to avoid terror's edge. And I went so far as to say that people who are self-aware can really control their life so that they stay in the learning zone. And up until now, I had done that. I had crafted a pretty amazing life and a pretty wonderful career in my comfort zone, stretching, learning, and growing, but never hitting that terror's edge. So when my own journey took me way beyond terror's edge, I had a couple of problems. One, I was beyond terror's edge. Two, I'd given myself this identity that I must not be self-aware. And three, I had this dream that was so stinking easy for everyone else to achieve that just was perpetually out of reach. Suddenly, I found myself completely consumed on this roller coaster ride, emotionally draining. I would spend months waiting for this green light, clearing medical tests at certain points in time, changing my travel schedule, and I was lucky living in Massachusetts to get health insurance. I would then spend 10 to 12 days jacking myself up every night with multiple injections of hormones. And then in the mornings, I would scramble to get blood work and ultrasounds and sonograms and explain to colleagues why, yet again, I was late to work. Then, a couple days later, so 2 weeks after you started the process, there'd be a surgery where they would surgically remove the eggs from you. OR, full anesthesia. You would wait on pins and needles to see how many eggs they were able to collect. And then they would mix those eggs with my husband's sperm, and we would wait to see how many fertilized. And then would wait to see how many embryos grew and evolved. 3 days later, I would return for another procedure where they would return embryos into my uterus. And then the real ride came. Nothing to do for 12 long days but wait. You became hyper-vigilant, feeling every possible move down there, and you would start to beg, plead, pray that those little embryos would embed and that something would take hold. What's interesting is that thousands and thousands of women around the country and across the globe navigate this ride in silence, pretending to the outer world that there's nothing wrong, there's nothing missing, like a baby in their world. Medical technology has advanced at such an amazing level that you can almost see inside yourself. They can test all these little micro changes. They know exactly what's happening, and so it's so frustrating because there's this illusion of control where there's none. At every turn, we would pepper our doctor with questions. If you can know this much about my body, why can't I get pregnant? What's going on? And determined to conceive, we did everything. We saw a number of different doctors. I drank wheatgrass a couple times a day. Did acupuncture, meditation, herbs. I gave up chocolate. I gave up coffee. I gave up wine. I gave up sugar. And worst of all for me, I gave up running. And with each failed cycle, there was mounting intensity. Each failed cycle felt more devastating, more isolating. And with each failed cycle, I felt even more out of control. My emotional explosions so close to the surface. The more deep my yearning, the more awkward the conversations were with people around me. Having witnessed our fourth failed cycle, my brother, so well-intending, father of two beautiful biological girls, mustered up the courage over cocktails. He said, Lila and I are thinking about having another child, and we're exploring adoption. Have you thought about that? Unfortunately, my hormones were so ripe. Well into my second gin and tonic of the evening, and massive explosion. And unfortunately, he was so well-intended, and I think he was really glad for the first time that he lived overseas. So the World Health Organization has classified infertility as a disease. The Supreme Court has ruled that procreation is a right, not a privilege. And research shows that women who are experiencing infertility have equal levels of depression and anxiety of women with heart disease, AIDS, or cancer. And yet so often, so many women suffer alone with people not knowing how to engage them. A client of mine who had survived cancer herself said surviving cancer was nothing compared to navigating infertility. She said people just don't get it. They say the stupidest things like, you really just need to relax. Or, have you tried a headstand after having sex? Not helpful, again. So with each failed cycle, the grief would compound itself, and you would go off the fertility drugs when you found out you weren't pregnant, and a tsunami of hormones would rage through your body, and you could feel the world starting to crash down. After my fifth failed cycle, I was talking with a colleague of mine who had navigated his own depression. I was weeping in anticipation of this impending darkness that was going to come, and having journeyed the roller coaster beside me, he reminded me that cloud of darkness was just finite, and that anyone with depression would have coveted knowing that there'd be an end. And so for the first time, I found myself really relax into the heartache, weeping uncontrollably for hours on end, grief sweeping over me like waves, but for the first time, letting myself fully feel the sadness, the devastation, and the loss. Finally giving myself the time and the space I needed to be within this grief. So repeatedly, I was hitting up against my inner walls. I can't go on trying, and I can't conceive of going forward without becoming a mother. I so desperately wanted to bear a child. I had no choice. I stepped back onto that roller coaster. I pushed beyond terror's edge, and I stepped into the unknown. And in doing so, there's just a massive level of vulnerability, of letting go. I found solace in those who had suffered their own darkness. There is a wisdom in those who have sat in the space beyond terror's edge. I was honored by their capacity to be compassionate for me, to hold space and witness my suffering, not trying to fix it, not trying to solve it, and not trying to rationalize away what was happening that was so devastating. And I became incredibly grateful for those who got it. I remember a phone message from a very dear grad school friend. The message went something like this: "Hey Toots, I know we're scheduled to get together next week. I also know how hard you've been trying to have a baby. I know you ache for this baby, and I just want to let you know before you see me that I'm pregnant again. So I totally get it. If you don't want to see me, I get it. I love you either way. Just know that I'm here, whatever you need." I started to craft my life to have more people like that, people who energized me, and to avoid those people that seemed to deplete my most precious energy. We have a couple that we love so dearly who showed up after every single down round, sometimes with running shoes, sometimes a box of tissues, and sometimes a pint of Ben & Jerry's. We created a drug we called March Off. One night over dinner, I was with another dear friend, and she asked, "What's next?" I said, "Oh, I'm taking March Off." She said, "March Off? I'm not familiar with that drug. What does it do?" I said, "We're taking the month of March off. Stressful people, stressful projects, stressful demands." And at the end, we decided maybe we should get a life prescription of this. Perhaps the hardest thing for us to do, and perhaps the most important journey for me, was surrendering control. Surrendering control is not about giving up on what you want. It's about going after that dream in a new way, with a new type of agility and persistence, being open to possibilities and new ways of how you could achieve that. Ironically, life beyond terror's edge is very similar to life in the learning zone. You break things down into the smallest bite-sized pieces possible. Some days it's fine to just survive. You don't need to thrive. You have to be really, really clear on that outcome and incredibly flexible on your approach. And you develop a new discipline for celebrating those small things in life. What's different is the raw vulnerability that comes with the surrender and the accelerated learning that can happen when you're in a free fall beyond terror's edge. Personally, when I was beyond terror's edge, I opened a whole new continuum of myself. I started to see parts of myself that I didn't even know existed, that I didn't even know was possible. The depth of yearning opened a new veracity, a new passion for life. The depth of sorrow opened a new level of compassion for those in my life. And the depth of stretching opened new sides of myself and new possibilities. The depth of sadness opened a new height, a new possibility for loving. After our 8th cycle, we got another phone call. It was November 13th, 2012. I was partially pregnant. Again, something they don't tell you in 7th grade health class. So on the 12th day after the procedure, you would go in for a blood test where they would test your HCG level, which is a hormone that tells whether or not you're pregnant. If you are pregnant, your hormone level should be around 51 or higher. And I was at 13. So apparently you can be a little bit pregnant. On January 15th, we officially entered our 2nd trimester. And for the first time in years, we started to relax. We're going to have a baby, this most precious, coveted baby. And then I jumped into that type A personality, and I figured, how can I get 9 months of travel into my 2nd trimester? And true to life, there's always more. On April 18th, I learned that there is something worse than traveling on your birthday. It's landing in a random hospital in a random city, unsure what's happening down there. As I checked into the hospital, I told the doctor in charge, listen, the baby's health is my #1 priority, but if we could wrap this up by 1, I've got a keynote at GE down the street at 2. Some things die hard. And true to life, there's always more. On May 16th at 7:38 in the morning, I started to bleed profusely. Within seconds, what could have thrown us over terror's edge became yet another opportunity to step forward into the unknown. The doctor on call said, "It's probably nothing. Why don't you just come in and get it checked out?" She casually mentioned it'd be better to go by the hospital rather than the doctor's office. And being only at 30 weeks, we knew which hospital we were delivering at, but had no clue where that hospital was. As we came into labor and delivery, it became abundantly clear that this was indeed something potentially very, very, very bad. A steady stream of doctors started barraging us with information, telling us all the potential things that could go wrong, all the risks there were to the baby, all the possible complications and the decisions we might have to make in a split second. It was like drinking information from a fire hose, and it was incredibly overwhelming because the drugs that they were putting me on to protect the baby were turning my brain to mush, so my capacity to understand these decisions was very finite. We set our sights on incredibly small goals. We celebrated every hour I kept the baby inside, and then every day, and then every week. I joked that I'd won a one-way ticket into the slammer. I was getting locked up for the rest of my pregnancy. The dreams of waddling down Newbury Street, big as a house, started to fade, and I started to surrender a whole new type of control. I can't tell you how many people came into my room, asked me to pull up my shirt or pull down my pants that month. In our hospital room, there was a whiteboard that said goal, and on it we wrote healthy, happy baby. At 34 weeks, I was induced, and on June 11th at 2:26, with 14 other medical providers in the room, we met our most beautiful, precious, coveted baby boy. His early arrival earned him a 3.5-week stay at the neonatal intensive care unit, but by every indication, he was going to be just that, a very healthy, happy baby boy. This journey has fundamentally shifted how I think about life, and my heart goes out to the couples who are on the journey who did not have as positive of an outcome. And while I don't wish suffering or adversity on anyone, I do hope that you have dreams that you will pursue with reckless abandon, beyond terror's edge, and into that free fall of accelerated learning and into a fuller sense of yourself. We are at 9.5 months of bliss and counting. Thank you. Buddy? Yeah. So, thank you.